Salford, a city forged in industry, grit, and a fierce sense of community. But beneath its hard-working facade, a darker side lurked. This is a tale of power, loyalty, and betrayal, and at its heart is one man, Paul Massey. Known as Mr. Big, Massey cast a long shadow over Salford. He was a man who commanded respect and instilled fear in equal measure. Massey's story is not one of black and white, but shades of grey. Was he a ruthless gangster who ruled through violence? Or was he a protector, a Robin Hood figure who looked out for his own? The truth, as always, is far more complex. This is the story of the man who ruled Salford. A story of how a working-class lad rose to become one of Britain's most notorious gangsters, and how, in the end, his empire came crashing down. Join us as we delve into the underbelly of Salford, exploring the life and times of Paul Massey. We'll trace his journey from the tough streets of his youth to the heights of power. We'll examine the loyalties he forged and the rivalries he ignited, and we'll unravel the events that led to his shocking assassination. This is not just a story about one man, it's a story about a city grappling with its identity and its demons. Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of darkness. Prepare to meet Paul Massey, the man who ruled Salford. Paul Massey's story begins in the heart of Salford, a city scarred by industrial decline and social unrest. Growing up in the 1960s, Massey witnessed firsthand the hardships faced by his community. Poverty, unemployment, and crime were rife, casting a shadow over the lives of many. It was in this crucible of adversity that Massey's character was forged. Life was tough, and the streets offered a harsh education. Massey, like many young lads of his generation, found solace in the camaraderie of gangs. The allure of belonging, of power, of escaping the drudgery of everyday life was too strong to resist. Petty crime provided a sense of purpose, a way to make a name for himself. As Massey grew older, so too did his ambition. He possessed a natural charisma, a way of commanding respect that drew others to him. He was tough, shrewd, and utterly ruthless in his pursuit of power. The streets of Salford became his battleground, and he fought his way to the top with a ferocity that earned him both fear and admiration. By the 1980s, Massey had established himself as a major player in Salford's burgeoning underworld. He had a finger in every pie, from protection rackets to drug dealing. His reputation preceded him, whispered in hushed tones in the city's pubs and clubs. He was Mr. Big, the man to see if you wanted something done, legal or otherwise. Paul Massey's legacy is a tangled web of contradictions. To some, he was a monster, a ruthless gangster who ruled through fear and intimidation. To others, he was a protector, a man who looked out for his own and dispensed his own brand of justice. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a product of his environment, shaped by the harsh realities of life on the streets of Salford. He saw an opportunity to rise above his circumstances, and he seized it with both hands. He was fiercely loyal to his community, and he never forgot where he came from. So, was Paul Massey a protector or a predator? The answer is both, and neither. The Salford of the 1960s and 70s was a far cry from the regenerated city we know today. The air was thick with industrial grime, a constant reminder of the factories that had once been the lifeblood of the community. But times were changing. The factories were closing down, leaving behind unemployment and a sense of despair. In the shadow of these industrial giants, a different kind of industry was taking root: crime. For young Paul Massey, growing up in this environment, life was a daily struggle. Poverty was rife, opportunities were scarce, and the streets were a tough school. The spectre of violence was never far away, a constant threat that lurked around every corner. It was a world where respect was earned, not given, and where survival often depended on your wits and your fists. Despite the hardships, there was a strong sense of community in Salford. Neighbors looked out for each other, sharing what little they had. But this sense of solidarity was often overshadowed by the harsh realities of life on the margins. For many young men like Massey, the allure of gangs offered a sense of belonging, a surrogate family that provided protection and a way to escape the drudgery of their everyday lives. It was in this environment that Paul Massey's character was forged. He learned to be tough, resourceful, and to always watch his back. The streets of Salford were his classroom, and they taught him lessons that would shape the course of his life. Even as a young boy, Paul Massey possessed a rebellious streak. He chafed against authority, challenging the rules. This led him into conflict with the law from an early age. Petty theft, vandalism, and street brawls became commonplace. These early brushes with the law did little to deter him. They seemed to harden his resolve. The authorities saw him as a troublemaker. But to those who knew him, Massey was more than just a petty criminal. He was fiercely loyal to his friends and family. He possessed a natural charisma. As Massey grew older, his run-ins with the law became more serious. The stakes were higher, the consequences more severe, but he never lost sight of where he came from. In 1970s Salford, gangs offered security and belonging. They were a surrogate family, bound by loyalty and shared experience. For young men like Paul Massey, the gang provided purpose and protection. Massey thrived, his leadership qualities rising. Loyalty was paramount, and his commitment cemented his position. However, this belonging came at a price. The streets of Salford were a harsh mistress, and Paul Massey was one of her most devoted pupils. He became deeply entrenched in the city's criminal underworld. The petty thief was gone, replaced by a hardened criminal who commanded respect and instilled fear. His experiences had changed him, stripping away any illusions he might have had about the world, and leaving behind a man who was as ruthless as he was charismatic. Massey's reputation preceded him. He was known as an enforcer, a man who could be relied upon to get things done, no matter how unpleasant the task. He was feared for his quick temper and his willingness to resort to violence, but he was also respected for his loyalty and his unwavering commitment to his word. He was a man who lived by his own code, a code that was often brutal and unforgiving, but one that he adhered to without question. As Massey's influence grew, so too did his ambition. He was no longer content to be just another cog in the criminal machine. He wanted to be the one calling the shots, the one who dictated the terms. He saw an opportunity to carve out his own empire in the chaotic underworld of Salford, and he seized it with both hands. The transformation was complete. Paul Massey, the working-class lad from Salford, had become Mr. Big, a man who ruled his domain with an iron fist and whose name was whispered in hushed tones on the streets he had come to control. The streets of Salford were Massey's domain, ruled with an iron fist. His power lay in control of the streets, money, and Salford's underworld. Local businesses paid for his protection. Refusal meant intimidation or worse. Massey invested in legitimate businesses, blurring lines between gangster and entrepreneur. He was the puppet master. Salford danced to his tune. The moniker Mr. Big was more than just a nickname for Paul Massey. It was a carefully crafted persona, a projection of power and invincibility that instilled both fear and respect. Massey understood the importance of image, and he cultivated his reputation with the meticulousness of a master strategist. He knew that every word, every gesture, every public appearance was an opportunity to reinforce his dominance and solidify his legend. He was often seen at the city's most exclusive nightclubs, surrounded by an entourage of loyal lieutenants, always impeccably dressed, always in control. His generosity was legendary. He was known to shower his friends and allies with lavish gifts, reinforcing their loyalty and ensuring their silence. He understood that loyalty, bought or earned, was the lifeblood of his empire, but beneath the surface of charm and generosity lurked a darker side. Massey could be ruthless in dealing with his enemies. He ruled through fear, and he wasn't afraid to use violence to maintain his grip on power. Those who crossed him often disappeared, never to be seen again. The message was clear: challenge Mr. Big, and you challenge the very order of Salford's underworld. This carefully cultivated aura of power had a profound effect on the people of Salford. Some feared him, others respected him, but everyone knew his name. He had become a larger-than-life figure, a modern-day gangster who had risen from the streets to become the city's most notorious son. At the zenith of his power, Paul Massey's influence permeated every corner of Salford. He was the city's unofficial ruler, a shadowy figure whose presence loomed large over every street corner. The police seemed powerless to stop him, their efforts hampered by a code of silence. Massey had become untouchable, and he knew it. His criminal empire flourished, extending its tendrils into every facet of Salford's underworld. Drugs, protection rackets, extortion, and violence became the norm. Young men, eager to emulate their hero, flocked to his banner. Massey's word was law, and those who dared to question his authority did so at their peril. The city was caught in a web of fear and intimidation. Businesses paid their protection money without complaint. Residents turned a blind eye to the violence that plagued their streets. Salford had become Massey's personal fiefdom. However, beneath the surface, the seeds of discontent were beginning to sprout. Massey's rivals grew bolder, sensing an opportunity to challenge his supremacy. The police, though seemingly outmatched, never gave up their pursuit. The stage was set for a showdown. The cracks begin to show, internal strife and external threats. Maintaining an iron grip on an empire built on crime and fear is a precarious balancing act. Even Paul Massey, the self-proclaimed Mr. Big, faced internal strife and external threats. Cracks began to appear in his carefully constructed empire. Ambitious lieutenants and rival gangs sensed weakness. The police chipped away at the wall of silence. The net was closing in, slowly but surely. The question was no longer if his empire would fall, but when. The stage was set for a dramatic and violent chapter in the story of Paul Massey. Paul Massey was seen as a local hero, a modern-day Robin Hood. He helped those in need, paying for funerals and resolving disputes. His generosity earned him admiration, but also criticism. Some saw it as a way to control and manipulate the community. Massey control through fear. Massey ruled Salford's underworld with an iron fist, built on fear and intimidation. His facade of generosity hid a ruthless streak, resorting to violence to maintain control. Fear silenced dissent, ensuring loyalty and protecting Massey's empire. Behind the facade of community benefactor, whispers of a darker truth circulated about Paul Massey. Allegations of drug trafficking, extortion, and contract killings swirled through Salford. Some whispered his protection rackets were thinly veiled extortion schemes. The police suspected his web of connections extended far beyond the city limits. Whispers and allegations persisted, casting a long shadow over his legacy. Gang warfare gripped Salford. As Massey's power grew, so too did the resentment and envy of his rivals. Salford, once firmly under his control, began to fracture along gangland lines. New players emerged, younger and hungrier, eager to challenge the established order and claim their share of the spoils. Turf wars erupted, turning the city's streets into battlegrounds. The once sacred code of respect and loyalty that had governed Salford's underworld crumbled as ambition and greed took hold. Alliances shifted like the tides, betrayals became commonplace, and violence spiraled out of control. Massey, the architect of this criminal ecosystem, now found himself at the heart of a maelstrom of his own creation. Despite the escalating chaos, Massey remained a formidable force, a seasoned general commanding his troops. He fought back against the encroaching rivals, his reputation as a ruthless strategist preceding him. But the landscape had changed. The younger generation, fueled by a reckless disregard for the old ways, proved to be a different breed of adversary. They were less predictable, more volatile, and unbound by the same code of honor that had once governed the underworld. The escalating violence took its toll on Salford. The city, already grappling with social and economic challenges, became synonymous with gang warfare and lawlessness. The fear that had once been confined to the shadows now spilled out onto the streets, touching the lives of ordinary citizens. Massey, once seen by some as a protector, now found his name inextricably linked to the chaos engulfing his city. Paul Massey's notoriety extended far beyond the back alleys and smoky pubs of Salford. He had become a thorn in the side of law enforcement, a symbol of their inability to curb the city's rampant gang violence. The police, for their part, were relentless in their pursuit of Mr. Big, determined to dismantle his empire and bring him to justice. Raids were conducted on his known haunts, associates were interrogated, and every effort was made to gather the evidence needed to put him behind bars. But Massey, a master manipulator with a network of informants and a deep understanding of the legal system, always seemed to be one step ahead. Charges were dropped, witnesses recanted their testimonies, and Massey walked free, his reputation enhanced by his ability to evade the long arm of the law. However, this cat-and-mouse game couldn't last forever. The police, frustrated by their lack of progress, doubled down on their efforts. They established dedicated task forces, employed undercover operatives, and poured resources into building a watertight case against Salford's most notorious gangster. The pressure mounted, and the net began to close in around Massey. The authorities, sensing an opportunity to deliver a decisive blow against organized crime in Salford, were determined to make an example of him. A showdown was inevitable, a clash between the forces of law and order and the man who had seemingly operated with impunity for so long. In 1999, Paul Massey was arrested after a nightclub brawl. Charged with stabbing, he denied the offense. Found guilty, he was sentenced to 14 years. Prison life was harsh, stripping him of status. Yet, he maintained influence and respect. Massey emerged older but determined to reclaim his place. Violence erupts, foreshadowing tragedy. Massey's release in 2010 brought both hope and fear to Salford. Some saw a chance for order, others feared renewed violence. Their fears were not unfounded. Massey aimed to reclaim his dominance. Violence escalated, foreshadowing tragedy. The summer of 2015 hung heavy over Salford, a palpable tension in the air. The resurgence of violence following Massey's return from prison had cast a long shadow over the city. The streets, once bustling with life, now seemed to empty as dusk approached, residents retreating indoors, fearful of being caught in the crossfire. The threat of violence, always simmering beneath the surface, had boiled over, turning Salford into a tinderbox awaiting a spark. Massey, however, seemed unfazed by the growing unease. He moved with his usual swagger, a defiant grin etched on his face, seemingly unconcerned by the whispers that followed him like shadows. He frequented his usual haunts, the pubs and clubs where his legend had been forged, holding court, dispensing favors, and reminding everyone who was still in charge. His confidence, some whispered, bordered on recklessness. The police, for their part, maintained a visible presence, their patrols a constant reminder that the city was far from safe. Raids were conducted, suspects were questioned, but the violence continued, a bloody stalemate in a war with no end in sight. The sense of inevitability grew with each passing day. Something had to give. And then, on a day that began like any other, the storm broke, unleashing a wave of violence that would send shockwaves through Salford and beyond, forever etching the name of Paul Massey into the city's history. July 26, 2015, dawned like any other summer Sunday in Salford. The air was thick with humidity, the streets quiet as residents recovered from the previous night's festivities. For Paul Massey, however, this day would be anything but ordinary. It would be the day his luck finally ran out. He had become the target, the prey in a carefully orchestrated hunt. As the clock ticked past 4:40 p.m., a nondescript white van pulled slowly into Massey Street. The calm before the storm was about to shatter. The tranquility of that summer afternoon was obliterated in a hail of gunfire. As Massey stepped out of his home, a figure clad in black emerged from the white van, a weapon raised, its muzzle spitting fire and fury. The sound of the shots echoed through the quiet residential street, a terrifying symphony of violence that shattered the illusion of safety. The gunman, a professional, made every shot count. Massey, caught off guard, had no time to react, his body riddled with bullets before he hit the ground. The attack was swift, brutal, and calculated, a clinical execution that left no room for doubt. Paul Massey, the man who had ruled Salford's underworld for decades, was dead. As the echoes of the gunfire faded into the summer air, a stunned silence descended upon the street. Neighbors, paralyzed with fear, cautiously emerged from their homes, drawn by the macabre spectacle unfolding before their eyes. The sight of Massey, his body sprawled on the pavement, blood staining the concrete, sent shockwaves through the community. The man who had seemed invincible, untouchable, had been cut down in a hail of bullets, a stark reminder that even in death, there are no guarantees in the dangerous world he had inhabited for so long. The reign of Mr. Big was over, brought to an abrupt and violent end in a hail of gunfire that marked a turning point in Salford's history. The assassination of Paul Massey sent shockwaves through Salford and beyond, dominating headlines and sparking a frenzy of speculation. Who had dared to order the hit on such a notorious figure? Was it a rival gang seeking revenge, a disgruntled underling settling old scores, or a shadowy figure from Massey's past, returned to exact a long-awaited retribution? The police launched a murder investigation, their resources stretched thin as they attempted to piece together the events leading up to the shooting. Appeals for information were met with a wall of silence, the fear that Massey had cultivated during his reign of power lingering long after his death. Witnesses were reluctant to talk, fearing reprisals, their silence speaking volumes about the grip that fear still held over the community. Conspiracy theories abounded, fueled by rumor and speculation. Some whispered that Massey's murder was a professional hit, orchestrated by powerful figures with a vested interest in silencing him. Others claimed that his death was the inevitable consequence of a life lived by the sword, a karmic reckoning for years spent navigating the treacherous waters of Salford's underworld. The truth, as is often the case in such matters, remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of fear, loyalty, and self-preservation. Paul Massey's murder, like his life, was shrouded in mystery, a final enigma in the story of the man who had ruled Salford's underworld for so long. The streets of Salford bore witness to the rise and fall of Paul Massey. His death escalated violence, turning Salford into a battleground. The human cost was immeasurable, families torn apart. A generation grew up in fear, futures blighted. Despite efforts, the cycle of violence continued. Even in death, Paul Massey's presence loomed large over Salford. His name whispered in hushed tones, a legend told in pubs and on street corners, a symbol of defiance and power. To some, a folk hero, to others, a ruthless criminal. His shadow lingered, a reminder of the fine line between respect and fear. In the years following Paul Massey's assassination, Salford found itself at a crossroads. The city bore the scars of its violent past. Could it break free from the cycle of violence? Poverty and hopelessness persisted. The allure of gangs continued, yet glimmers of hope emerged. Community leaders provided alternatives. Police focused on engagement. Salford's future remained uncertain, but hope persisted.